guys, as you know, the first case study is due in Excel, and many of you have forgotten some of the tips and tricks that help you get things done. So I'm posting this little video to help out. So first, one of the questions that I get is, what do you mean by clean the data and check the data? So a lot of the data sets that you get in your introductory courses are going to be what we call clean already. That is, they don't have missing values, things are spelled correctly, etc. But in the real world, that is not going to be the case. That's going to be very rare, actually, in my experience. How do we take a look at the data? So one idea is to just click in this top row of the data, and you can click on your data tab at the top and apply a filter. And you can often just look at the filter categories just to see, like, was a country over here? So I'm just pulling down the drop down for the country column. Is there a country that's maybe spelled two different ways? Like maybe somebody coded the United States as US in some of the cells, but USA in some of the other cells. So you just kind of visually look like that. Now, this data set's larger, so it's a little more difficult to find errors this way, but that is one rudimentary way, something that I use sometimes to take a peek at what is in a column. All right. And another thing that you guys need to do is to count the number of rows. So we get students, even though this seems like a pretty basic problem, I think a lot of students aren't paying attention when they're doing it because it looks so basic, but we still have a lot who get it wrong on their first attempt. So one of the tips and tricks that we have is to just click in the first cell that you want to count and use Control-Shift-Down on a Windows or Command-Shift-Down on a Mac. And you have to keep hitting down until you find the bottom. Now this data set's very large and we have a lot of blanks. So that's not the best way to handle that one. Okay. But it does work on some small to medium-ish data sets. Okay. The other idea is to use the count functions, right? So if you want it to count anything that is text, you can use count A. So I'm going to go over here in N2 and I'm just going to type in count A and then highlight my column. Okay. And so you can just go all the way till you get to the bottom and put your parentheses, end your parentheses, and it'll count up everything in that column. Now, I didn't go all the way to the bottom, but that's another way to get it done. All right. So another way that we can count that I use probably more often than the ways I just showed you is a pivot table. So if we just click on the little triangle to the left of A and to the above 1 up here in the top left corner, we highlight everything on the sheet. And I'm just going to do Insert Pivot Table. Okay, so from the Insert menu option, click Pivot Table. And I'm just going to accept the defaults because I don't want to clutter this page with a pivot table too. So we have a lot going on that sheet. Okay, so it started a new sheet. I called it Sheet 2, and we can make a pivot table. So if I wanted to count up how many of each country, for instance, I could drag country down to the rows, and then I could also just put it in your calculated value box. And if you put a categorical variable in both places, it'll just count for you. So you can see that Albania has 2, Argentina has 9,431 rows with relating to that country. You can even right click on these cells. So I do this a lot and do sort. And I'm going to do largest to smallest. So I can see that the US shows up the most, France is second, Italy's third, etc. And if you scroll to the bottom of the list, you also get a grand total of the number of entries in that column. Okay? All right, so that's one thing in the pivot table. Another thing that you can do in the pivot table is you can look at this variable broken down by another variable. So let's say that we want to count up the countries, but we also want to break it down by like maybe the taster name. So I'll just put taster name in the columns. I think this is going to be pretty big. Yep. But you get the general idea. So now I've broken down the counts by taster name. And if you go to the edges of the pivot table, you still get all your totals. And if you scroll to the bottom, you'll get your totals. Now, what if I wanted to get the average price by country and taster name? Then, instead of count of country, I'm just going to drag that back up Get it out of there in that calculated value box. Now I'm going to put price in the calculated value box. Now, what it's going to do there is it's going to put the sum of price in, and I said I wanted an average. So what you do is you just click this little arrow to get the drop-down box, go to value field settings, and change it to average, okay? And then you can click on a cell, and in that value field settings box, so you can access the value field settings box several ways. To number format, you can change it to a number, have it round to 2, 3, 4 decimal places, whatever you want it to do. Click OK, and it'll do that. Okay, so that's a little bit of the basic functionality of a pivot table. Hopefully that'll remind you about how to get things done so that you can get a correct answer. And whenever I'm doing an analysis, I do it usually at least 2 ways so that I can check my work. So I'm also going to show you how to use the filter that a lot of you are going to go ahead and use if I didn't point out the pivot table anyway. All right, so I'm going to go back to the sheet with that we started with the data in it. Okay, if I asked you to get the average points for a specific country, a lot of you wouldn't head for the pivot table right away. You'd head straight for the filter. So I've seen many, many students do this. So you'd come over here, you'd click in the header row, you'd click the filter, you'd do the drop-down menu for country, you'd unselect all of them. Let's say I asked you to get the average points for Argentina. So you'd just check Argentina, click OK, and then you'd come over here to the side and you'd use your average function. You'd highlight all the values in the points column, you'd close your parentheses, hit enter, and boom, you'd have a number, right? So if you scroll back up, you can see your number. But what's wrong with this method? You may have forgotten that the average function applied to a filtered column will still include the hidden rows. Okay, so another way, a really cool function that gets around all of this is the subtotal function. Okay, and notice that when I type the subtotal function in, it has a bunch of different mathematical calculations that it can do. It can take the average, it can count A, max, min, product, standard deviation, sum, a bunch. So I'm just going to choose the average, number 1. I'm going to put a 1 in there for my function number. And then I'm going to tell it what I want to take the average of with the subtotal function. All right, so I'm going to highlight that column again, end my parenthesis. And you can see that now I have a different average. This average computed with the subtotal function is correct. This average computed with the old friend average function is not correct. So the subtotal function is really cool, like when you use it for the sum, because a subtotal function will never include the calculations in its calculations the results of another subtotal function. Okay, so I hope this short little video helps you a little bit. Remember how to use Excel so you can get a good score the first time on your case study. Don't forget you have 2 attempts, but on the second attempt, hitting submit once puts you on your second attempt. On your second attempt, some of the questions will be the same, but some of them will be subtly different. All right, good luck.